Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at the quadratic formula. Now this formula can be used to solve any quadratic equation. The only key is the quadratic equation has to be in standard form. And if it's not in standard form, you have to put it there. So the formula here, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And remember, the number in front of the x squared is always a, the number in front of x is b, and the number without any letters with it is always going to be c. So our first example here is not quite in standard form, because standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I'm going to put this in standard form by subtracting 35 from both sides. So that's going to leave me with 3x squared plus 8x minus 35 equals 0. And now I'm just going to plug it into the formula here. So negative 8 plus or minus square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 35 all over 2 times 3. Now, as far as showing work, I would expect that you're going to probably use your calculator quite a bit here. So in showing work, this is enough right here. Once I see that you've got it correctly substituted in, I kind of expect you to use the calculator at this point. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 420 all over 6. 64 plus 420 gives me 484. And then when I reduce this down, I get 8 plus 22 divided by 6 and 8 minus 22 divided by 6. So 8 plus 22 is 30 divided by 6. One of my roots here is x equals 5. 8 minus 22 divided by 6. My other root here is negative 2.33. Now most of the time we're going to probably have decimals for answers, so a whole number is kind of unusual, at least for this. Alright, our second example here, again not in standard form, so the first thing I have to do is put this in standard form. So I've got negative 2x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. And now I'm going to plug this into my formula here. I've got negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 3 all over 2 times a, which will give me a negative 4. So I've got negative 2 plus or minus 2 squared is going to give me 4. 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 gives me a negative 24. So this gives me a square root of negative 20 all over 4. Negative 2 plus or minus. First thing I'm going to do, negative 1 times 4 times 5 all over 4. So I'm pulling out my imaginary root here. So I'll be left with negative 2. My imaginary root just comes out as I. The square root of 4 is 2 all over 4. And I probably could reduce this, but I'm going to leave it just the way that it is. And now for our third one, why don't you pause the video and give this one a try. Alright, I'm going to put this into standard form. So I'm going to bring negative 2x minus 12x. Bring the 13 over here. It's going to give me negative 18 when I combine that with the negative 5. That's going to equal 0. I'm going to plug this in. which gives me negative 12, gives me a positive 12, plus or minus 12 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 18 all over negative 4. 12 squared gives me 144. 18 times 2 is 36 times 4 is 144. So what I have here is 12 divided by negative 4 gives me a negative 3. So this here has one root, x equals negative 3, and kind of what this looks like is this. The parabola comes down and it just touches and goes up. This parabola here crosses at two places, and this parabola here never even touches the x-axis. Alrighty, so word problem here. Some fireworks are fired vertically into the air from the ground at an initial speed of 80 feet per second. The equation for the object's height at time t of launch is negative 16 t squared plus 80t. How long will it take the fireworks to reach the ground? Well, this here is a quadratic equation. Some of you might be tempted to say, hey, wait a minute, this here is just going to make an arc, and why don't I just find the vertex and go halfway? You can't do that. You can't do that because really what's happening is you're standing on a platform here at 80 feet above the ground, so the arc's going like this. So the vertex here isn't really going to help us. So since the vertex isn't going to help us at all, we're going to use the quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Well, in this case, I only have an a and a b. So I'm going to have negative 80 plus or minus 80 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 0. Well, the thing of it is, with c being 0, that's going to knock out this whole portion right here. So I'm just going to have negative 80 plus or minus the square root of 80 squared just gives me 80. Oops. So this here is going to be negative 80 plus 80, which gives me 0, or negative 80 minus 80, which gives me negative 160. And this now makes absolutely no sense to me. Alright, I sat down here to take a look at this problem, and I realized I had forgotten to bring along my 2a. So I'd forgotten to bring along here my negative 32, and divide this by negative 32, which that gives me 5 seconds. Common mistake I see a lot made when using the quadratic formula is people forget the denominator. The other common mistake I see in using the quadratic formula is this part right here, this negative b. Please remember that when b is already negative, that it turns into a positive, and those are the two common mistakes that I see. And I do note, as I'm looking here at problem number 3 here, that I did goof up a little bit, that this negative 12 should have been a positive 12, and this should have been a negative. This should have been a negative, which makes that a positive 3. Alright, if you've got any questions on the quadratic formula, please let me know, and I will see you in class on Thursday.